What is up, my friends? Welcome back to another video, and today we are doing another sample library review, and specifically we're looking at Insanity Samples' Cool Jazz Collection. And first of all, I want to thank Insanity Samples for sending me a copy of this library. They reached out to me after producing it, and after looking at what it kind of came with and the overall aesthetic of the product, I was instantly interested because, as you know, I love the kind of jazz style myself, and although I'm not a jazz musician, I do write some jazz pieces sometimes because it's just a lot of fun to do. And so whenever a new tool comes out on the market that can make our job easier and make our music sound better, I'm always up for a challenge, up for taking a look at something like that. So yeah, just a big thank you to Billy for sending me this my way. But I want to show you a little bit of the product page, what it kind of comes with, and how much it costs and all that. So as you can see here, it costs £99 or £199 regular price. So currently it's on sale. But let's take a look at the page here. So it says the Cool Jazz Collection is a library of 5 instruments that embodies the cool jazz idiom with a Miles Davis, Chet Baker style and feel, perfect for moody, brooding noir style cool jazz. So yeah, you'll actually see this when we go through the instruments a little bit, and you'll notice how kind of mellow and almost laid back the instruments all sound. So we'll get to that in just a second. And the instruments here include the trumpet, muted and unmuted, tenor sax, piano, upright bass, and drums. So as you can see, they're meant to be used in an ensemble context together because they're kind of recorded in the same room, and they have the same treatment applied to them and the same playability, of course. So you could very easily make them sit in a room and play together. Or, of course, you can use them separately with other libraries if you'd like to. So yeah, feel free to go on their product page and take a look at what it comes with. But let's head over to Logic and take a look at the library itself. And I'll show you the folder structure, what it comes with, and all of that. So if we take a look here, we have the trumpet. And first of all, let me show you the folder structure. So this is the Cool Jazz Collection here. And we have the trumpet, tenor sax, piano, upright bass, and drums as advertised. And here you can see I have all the instruments loaded up. And so just looking at the GUI itself, you can see how simple it really is. Especially look at the upright bass, right? And look at the piano. You don't really have that many parameters to tweak, especially the drums. Look at this. You only have like the reverb, which for me is awesome, because if I'm buying a library, I'm buying it for its sound and of course for its instrument, but too many tweakability options and things you can do to the actual sound just tends to put me off personally, because I'm not a very technical person, so I like to use instruments as is out of the box, and whenever they sound great, then that's just like a bonus, right? Let me just play a couple of notes here and listen to this. Okay, so obviously I basically have all the instruments playing together at the same time, and that's what it sounds like with the ensemble playing, all together. But let's take a look at the trumpet first. And so here you can see we have 2 sections of 4. We have longs, true legato, polylongs, staccato, and falls, all with mute, as you can see at the end here. And then the bottom section is the same articulations, but just without the Harmon mute. I believe it's a Harmon mute. So let's just have a listen to each of these. All right, so a couple of things to note here. First of all, the instrument is controlled by velocity a lot of the time. I mean, you do have the expression slider here, which you can use mod wheel for, but the dynamic range, as you can hear here, so let me go back to maybe a long articulation, sustain. You hear the actual dynamic range in that one sample itself is not huge, right? And that's basically because it's meant to be controlled through velocity. So the louder and the harder you play a certain note, that's going to trigger the different dynamic layers rather than the mod wheel doing all of that itself. So for example, you have the piano dynamic. I'm playing quiet. I play a little louder. Sorry, a little louder. You get MF. And then louder you get the forte, right? But I personally think the instrument really sings when you play at the piano layer. So this requires a lot of control as a pianist, as a piano player. Just readjust there. Just because, you know, when you're a pianist and when you control the keys, it's really important to be able to apply consistent amounts of pressure on whatever notes you're playing. So for example, if an entire passage is supposed to be played piano and quietly, then you want to be able to play the same type of pressure on every single note. And this requires some dexterity and a little bit of practice, right? Little tip here as a pianist, if you want to play quietly, relax your fingers, but still keep them curved. So if you tense up, it's actually going to make the muscles a little inflexible and you won't be able to control the notes as much as you would like. So it's all about staying relaxed, keeping your fingers curved, using the fingertips, and just being very conscious about the amount of pressure you're applying to the certain MIDI controller or keyboard that you're playing. That is why, you know, a library like this is kind of unique. Like there are more sample libraries that use the mod wheel based approach. For example, the one that comes to the top of my head is Cinematic Studio Series, where the dynamic layers are scrolled through using the mod wheel and the expression at the same time. Whereas a library like this, if you play harder, you're accessing a different dynamic layer. So it's a slightly different approach, but you know, it works just as well, and it really depends on your own workflow, you know. But yeah, I kind of like, oh, and the other thing I wanted to say was these samples are not looped. So if you hold a note, you heard kind of in the beginning examples there, I played a note and after about 5-10 seconds, the sample just faded away. So again, this reminds me of Berlin Woodwind's expansion B and C. They kind of have that trailing off effect where they don't loop the sample, and that creates this really realistic, natural ending result. The downside, of course, is that you can't control that length of the note manually, like how long you want it to go before it fades out, but you get realism instead. So let's move on to the tenor sax and have a listen to this guy. Okay, so that's definitely interesting, right? So the tone itself is very warm, especially on those piano layers. When you get more into the MF, the forte dynamics, it gets a little bit more nasally, a little more honky. And for me personally, I kind of like the piano dynamic layers the most, hence why I think it works really well for the kind of quieter, cool jazz style. The other thing is, like, I do hear some sax libraries that, you know, when they do play the louder dynamics, they tend to, like, they're able to produce a kind of a warm and round tone as well to it, and it's really interesting. Maybe it's also because they put in a little bit of vibrato as well that kind of rounds it out. But it would be really interesting to see, you know, these upper dynamic layers have more vibrato at the onset of the note, and maybe that's just like because it's meant for slower lines that you kind of play the note first and then ease into the vibrato later into the note, right? But for slightly more fast styles of playing, it would be cool to have maybe the vibrato come in a little bit earlier so that each of the individual notes are a little bit more expressive. And the thing is, if I'm playing a little bit too hard, then I'm going to access maybe by accident like a mezzo forte or forte sample, and it might kind of disrupt the overall line, which I wouldn't want. So once you play in your lines, it's really important to kind of go in and tweak the individual velocities of the notes just to make sure they're consistent and give you the performance you're actually looking for. All right, let's move on to, oh, sorry, I should probably go through a couple of these articulations as well. So it seems like that one is looped. It's kind of cool. If you play shorter on the staccato, you actually get that staccato cutting off a little earlier. So if you need staccatissimo, that might be a kind of a really fast way to do that. Just play shorter on the staccato. All right, moving on to the piano. The piano is actually very characterful. Very much reminds me of the piano in blue from Cinesamples, and it really has that kind of warm, vintage, slightly detuned sound. Let me show you what I mean. So it kind of has that like felted sound in a way, and the dynamic range actually isn't huge here. So this is the softest sample. A little louder. Loudest. Right? The overall vibe is meant to be played at a kind of a quieter dynamic. So it's really interesting to see how it responds in relation to velocity. But overall, it's not your workhorse piano for everyday pianos like classical or anything. But for a kind of a cool jazz vibe, it definitely hits the mark. Then we have the upright bass. This guy kind of features a really nice full-bodied sound that I do really enjoy. So we have longs and stopped, very, very simple. Really interesting thing here about the stopped bass is that it doesn't stop right away, and so it kind of like waits for a second before it cuts off. And what it allows us to do is continue to play these walking bass quarter note lines without having to worry about the note cutting off too early. If you are worried about that, you could always just go with the longs, and then key switch to the stopped sample at the very end. That definitely works too. One thing by default I usually like, and I'm kind of spoiled by the Project Sam Swing library, is that the instrument, the double bass, comes with a legato function by default. So when I play from one note to another for the longs, it cuts off the previous note before it, and so it's not possible to play polyphonically on that instrument, I believe. And because I only use kind of the pizzicato walking bass line for that purpose, then I don't really need any polyphonic functions. So that would be a really cool feature here, is if we could have that kind of legato function. You play one note, when you play the next note, the first note kind of cuts off. It's not super obvious, obviously, here, but just you know, it's a nice to have, if anything. Cool, and finally we have the drum kit. As you can see, it's actually pretty simple. There's not like samples mapped out across the entire keyboard, so it's not super overwhelming, but let's walk through really quickly what these samples are. So at the bottom we have key switches for brushes and sticks. Then the blue key range here is the kick drum, so you can see right here. Then we have the snare drum, which is green. There we go. We have snare rim shot. We have floor toms, high toms, and a brush pattern, which is untimed. So you can play some, you know, pretty simple patterns. You could also use the the swirl here that's untimed. So yeah, that's the idea. You know, the drums don't sound super duper close, but again, they're not like super reverberant as well. And you can obviously adjust it here. But I actually like the default amount of reverb that comes with each instrument. I think it, you know, sounds relatively smooth and natural. And again, you know, you could play all these guys together at the same time if you really wanted to. But generally, these set of instruments are meant to be played out of the box. They contain a very nice sound. Really, I think the only thing I would say is just, yeah, for the tenor sax, I would have loved to hear slightly more vibrato in those notes generally, a slightly warmer tone in the upper dynamics myself, and the lower dynamics sound great. Maybe a slightly longer legato transition too for you know, the notes as well, just so it doesn't sound like it's jumping notes right away, but it's more like, you know, going into the next note a little bit more. Piano is awesome, you know, definitely meant for those background textures and, you know, little high fills here and there if you need to. Upright bass is nice and full. Definitely has that resonance in that that full bodied low end that is kind of required in a lot of exposed parts for upright bass, I think. And then finally the drums, you know, a very bare bones but very functional kit that you need. So yeah, I could definitely recommend this type of collection if you're looking for that type of sound, that Miles Davis really cool jazz relaxed sound that requires this type of combo. You don't get every single articulation under the sun, but I think just with a more melodic approach, you know, something that's a little more laid back, not super fancy, this library can definitely serve you well. But ultimately, it depends on what you need, and if you enjoy the walkthroughs, you know, enjoy the sounds, enjoy the playability of it, you know, the velocity-based approach here. Use your ears, you know, think about, do you actually need something like this? And if not, then, you know, maybe wait for a later date if this is just like a hobby for you, wait for a sale or something. But, you know, for this type of music, this is definitely an interesting choice, and not for you know, a super ridiculous price either. So yeah, big congrats to Insanity Samples again for doing a great job on this library. And I want to thank you for watching. So before you go out, I do want to give you my sample library buyer's guide. It's my personal favorite libraries, all combined into one document. So if you're on the market for, you know, string, woodwind, brass, percussion libraries, it's all listed in there, what I use on a daily basis. So I think it'll be really helpful for you. So if it's the very first link in the description box below, if you want to check it out, it's yours totally free. And it's just my way of saying thank you for joining me here today. So I really appreciate it. I'll catch you in the next video, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.